My stepfather destroyed my life because he thinks my stepbrother deserves my fiancée more than I do. So, here I am, typing this out because I seriously don't know what else to do. I need to get this off my chest, and honestly, I could use some advice or at least someone telling me I'm not crazy. But let me start from the beginning because this whole thing is a mess, and I can't believe I'm living through it. I never had the closest relationship with my stepfather, Greg. He married my mom when I was about 12. At the time, I was just a kid trying to figure out where I fit in after my dad passed away. My mom was doing her best, and Greg seemed like an okay guy at first, but I could always sense there was something off. He had this way of making me feel like I was just there. Not his son, not someone he cared about, just a kid who came with the package. Greg had a son from his previous marriage, Mark, who was a year younger than me. Mark was the golden boy in Greg's eyes. He could do no wrong. Every little thing Mark did was amazing, and Greg made sure everyone knew it. If Mark got a B on a test, it was a cause for celebration. If I got an A, it was met with a shrug. But whatever, I didn't care. I had my mom, and she was enough. Fast forward a few years, and I met Emily. She was everything I ever wanted in a partner. Smart, funny, kind, and beautiful inside and out. We started dating in college, and I knew pretty quickly that she was the one. After graduation, we both landed decent jobs, and things were going great. We moved in together, and I started saving up for a ring. I was planning to propose during a trip to the beach, a place that held special memories for us. Now, Greg was never overly interested in my life. He'd ask the occasional, "How's work?" but that was about it. But when I started talking about Emily, something changed. Suddenly, he was asking all sorts of questions. What's she like? Where does she work? What do her parents do? It was weird, but I thought maybe he was just trying to take an interest for once. I was wrong. So wrong. The day I proposed to Emily was perfect. She said yes, and we were both over the moon. I called my mom to tell her the news, and she was thrilled. I could hear Greg in the background, and he didn't seem too excited, but whatever, I didn't need his approval. We started planning the wedding, and that's when things started to get strange. Greg began showing up at our apartment unannounced. He'd say he was just in the neighborhood, but we lived 30 minutes away from my mom's house. He started calling Emily directly, asking her for advice on random things or inviting her to lunch. She thought it was a little odd, but she's a sweet person and didn't want to be rude, so she'd go along with it. One day, Emily came home from one of these lunches, and she seemed off. I asked her what was wrong, and she hesitated before telling me that Greg had been saying some really inappropriate things about our relationship. He told her that I wasn't good enough for her, that she deserved someone more like Mark, someone who could take care of her the way she needed. He even hinted that I was only marrying her for her family's money, which was complete bullshit. I was furious. I confronted Greg, and he acted like he had no idea what I was talking about. He said Emily must have misunderstood him and that he was just looking out for her. My mom tried to smooth things over, but the damage was done. I told Greg to stay away from Emily, and for a while, he did. But it didn't last. Mark started hanging around more too. He was always nice enough, but I could tell there was something behind the smiles. He'd make little comments about how Emily and I were rushing into marriage, how we should take more time to explore our options. He even joked about how it was a shame I got to her first. I laughed it off, but it started to get under my skin. The final straw came a few weeks before the wedding. Emily was staying late at work, so I decided to head over to my mom's to pick up some things she'd been holding for the wedding. When I walked in, I heard voices coming from the living room. It was Greg and Mark, and they were talking about Emily. "You know, Mark, I think you'd be a much better match for her," Greg was saying. "She's wasted on him. You've got everything she needs, and you're better looking too. Women like her want a man who can provide, who's confident. Not some kid who's still figuring things out." I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own stepfather was plotting behind my back to ruin my relationship. I wanted to burst in and confront them, but something made me stop. I wanted to hear what else they had to say. "Yeah, but she's already with him," Mark replied. "What am I supposed to do about it?" "Just be patient," Greg said. "They're not married yet. There's still time. You just need to show her what she's missing. Make her see that she could do better. I've seen the way she looks at you when you're around. There's something there. You just need to push it a little." I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed into the room, and they both jumped like they'd seen a ghost. I let them have it. I told Greg he was a miserable excuse for a man, trying to sabotage his own stepson's happiness. I told Mark that he was a snake and that I'd never let him anywhere near Emily again. My mom came in and tried to calm me down, but I was done. I went home and told Emily everything. She was shocked, but to my surprise, she wasn't entirely surprised. She admitted that she'd been feeling uncomfortable around Greg and Mark for a while, but she didn't want to upset me, so she kept it to herself. We agreed that we needed to put some distance between us and them, at least until after the wedding. But Greg and Mark weren't done. A few days later, Emily got a message from a fake social media account. It was a bunch of screenshots of texts that were supposedly from me, talking about how I was only marrying her for her money, how I was planning to cheat on her, and how I didn't really love her. They were obviously fake, but they were done well enough to cast doubt. Emily showed them to me, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. I tried to assure her they were fake, but I could tell she was shaken. I knew it was Greg and Mark behind it, but I had no proof. We decided to push ahead with the wedding, but the joy that was supposed to be there was tainted. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was a nervous wreck. Not because I didn't want to marry Emily, I did, more than anything, but because I knew Greg and Mark would be there, and I had no idea what they might try to pull. My mom convinced me to let them attend, saying it would cause more problems if I tried to ban them. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that maybe everything would be okay. But then came the reception. Greg made a beeline for Emily as soon as the dancing started. I watched as he pulled her aside, and they had a tense conversation. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw Emily's face go from confused to angry. She walked away from him, coming straight to me. Before she could say anything, Greg was at the microphone, tapping it to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, and I felt my stomach drop. "I'd like to make a toast to the happy couple. But before I do, there's something I think everyone here should know." My heart was pounding. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I knew it wouldn't be good. I looked at Emily, who was pale as a ghost. Greg started talking about how love is built on trust and honesty. How secrets can destroy a relationship. And then he dropped the bomb. "James has been hiding something from you all," he said, looking directly at Emily. "He's been in contact with his ex, planning to leave Emily for her after the wedding. He's only marrying her for her money." There was a collective gasp from the guests. My mind was racing. What the hell was he talking about? I hadn't spoken to my ex in years, and I sure as hell wasn't planning to leave Emily. I looked at her, pleading with my eyes for her to believe me. But she was staring at Greg, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is this true?" she whispered. "No. Of course not," I said, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Greg smirked, enjoying the chaos he'd just unleashed. I didn't want to say anything, but I couldn't let Emily go into this marriage without knowing the truth. I have the texts to prove it. He pulled out his phone, showing some screenshots that looked convincingly real but were completely fabricated. I knew it was all a lie, but proving that in the moment seemed impossible. I tried to get control of the situation, but Emily was already walking out, tears streaming down her face. I ran after her, trying to explain, but she wouldn't listen. She was hurt and confused, and Greg's manipulative actions had done their job. I managed to get her alone and tried to tell her the truth. I showed her my phone, my recent calls, and messages, proving that I had no contact with my ex. I tried to explain that Greg was behind everything, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Emily needed time. She went to stay with a friend for a while, and the wedding was a disaster. The reception ended early, and people left in a daze. Greg and Mark had ruined one of the happiest days of my life, and all I could do was wait and hope Emily would come around. I spent the next few weeks trying to prove my innocence and mend the relationship with Emily. I contacted every guest who had witnessed the disaster at the reception, asking for their support. I showed them my side of the story, and most of them were sympathetic, but it didn't undo the hurt that had already been caused. Emily eventually agreed to meet with me. We talked for hours, and I did my best to convince her that Greg's actions were a manipulation. She listened, but I could see that the trust was shaken. She told me she needed space to think things over. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to hear. Meanwhile, Greg and Mark continued their efforts to drive a wedge between us. They would send Emily messages pretending to be from me, trying to make it look like I was still up to something shady. I tried to block them, but they were relentless. After months of trying to repair the damage, Emily and I finally sat down and had a heart-to-heart. I could tell she was still struggling, but she was willing to work on our relationship. We decided to put off the wedding and take things slowly. It was a tough decision, but it felt like the right one. Greg and Mark were still a part of our lives, but we kept our distance. They tried to make trouble wherever they could, but we refused to let them win. Emily and I worked on rebuilding our trust and our relationship. It wasn't easy, and there were many nights where I questioned if we'd ever fully recover, but we kept fighting. In the end, we managed to find our way back to each other. It took a lot of hard work and patience, but Emily and I were stronger for it. We did end up getting married, but it was a small, private ceremony with just our closest friends and family. Greg and Mark were not invited. We still have occasional run-ins with them, and the scars from that period haven't fully healed, but we've learned to navigate our lives with a new perspective. The experience taught us both the importance of trust, communication, and standing up for ourselves against those who try to tear us down. Looking back, I can't believe how far we've come. The pain and drama that Greg and Mark caused were immense, but they also showed us the strength of our bond. We may not have had the wedding we originally planned, but we've built a life together that's filled with love and respect. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's to never underestimate the lengths people will go to for their own selfish gain. And to always fight for what you know is right, even when it feels like the world is against you. Thanks for reading, everyone. I hope my story can help others who might be facing similar struggles. Sometimes, the biggest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves and with those we love the most.